girlfriend of a Boston police officer whose body was found
in the murder trial of Karen Reed after the jury said it was unable to
they
reach
will
a
retry
verdict.
Karen Reed
is
after a
accused
judge
of
declared a mistrial.
Hi, alternates. Welcome back to day 29 of the Karen Reed retrial. And as you can imagine, as we near the end of the defense's case, it was a day full of tension, science, and more than one call for a mistrial. Today, we had not one, but two major defense witnesses take the stand. Dr. Wolf, which we already met, he's a biomechanical expert from ARCA who was wrapping up his testimony from day 28. And we also heard from Dr. Elizabeth Lappasato, a forensic pathologist who the defense is hoping will blow a hole in the prosecution's motor vehicle theory. We also heard very briefly from a private investigator who went to 34 Fairview last week and took some measurements. But first, we've got to talk about this drama with the sweatshirt. And when I say drama, I mean drama. All right. Court started off today with fireworks after Brennan continued his cross-examination of Dr. Wolf. Specifically, Brennan retrieved John O'Keefe's sweatshirt that you might recall was layered in between this plexiglass-looking thing to show the jury. Well, Brennan turned the sweatshirt around as he was showing Dr. Wolf, and he said, "Hey, did you see the holes on the back of the shirt?" Dr. Wolf was a little bit shocked, and he admitted that he hadn't. When pressed further, Dr. Wolf said that those holes that he was just seeing for the first time now did not look like road rash. Boom. Brennan concluded his cross-examination, appearing very proud of himself. However, Robert Alessi quickly called for a meeting outside the jury's presence. And when I say that he was fuming, he was fuming. Long story short, the defense requested a mistrial with prejudice, basically saying that the holes on the back of John O'Keefe's shirt were actually made by the laboratory for testing purposes. And those holes were not present when John O'Keefe was found on January 29th. And honestly, if the prosecution had read their own reports, they would have seen this. Whoops. Brennan's response? "My bad, Your Honor. I screwed up. But a mistrial is not necessary. All the jury needs is a curing instruction." And guess what? The defense's motion for a mistrial was denied, but when the jury came back into the courtroom, this is what they heard.
Jurors, I appreciate your patience. Mr. Alessi, why don't you hold the exhibit up for the jurors, please? All right, jurors, that's the back of the sweatshirt that was shown to Dr. Wolf. Okay, thank you. Why don't you go ahead and put it back in the bag. So, jurors, I instruct you that those holes were made by the criminalist, Ms. Harnett, during the course of her inspection and sampling of the sweatshirt back on May 18th, 2023. Okay?
So, yeah, the jury didn't know what exactly happened, but they were outside of the courtroom long enough to know that something happened in there, like something very serious. And they haven't received a lot of curing instructions, so they probably had a lot to think about. All right, the defense did get photos of the sweatshirt into evidence to show the condition that the sweatshirt was in before the lab cut the back of the sweatshirt. All right. First witness on the stand was Dr. Daniel Wolf, back from yesterday. If Dr. Welcher is the blue paint guy, Dr. Wolf is the crash test dummy guy. On Friday, he testified that his test didn't replicate the kind of taillight damage seen on Karen Reed's SUV, at least not in the way that the prosecution alleges that the arm of John O'Keefe would have hit it. And remember, Dr. Wolf said that they were able to kind of replicate what Karen's SUV looked like by throwing a glass at the taillight, but not when they replicated the car backing up into an arm or a dummy. Today, Special Prosecutor Brennan went hard at Wolf's methodology. He questioned the size of the dummy, the weight of the dummy's arm, which was about 9.38 pounds, and he even mocked the use of the Rescue Randy dummy, which isn't a certified crash test dummy. Brennan said Randy's no dummy and noted that Randy is usually used for firefighter training, not biomechanical impact analysis. You know, points for sass, Brennan. Points for sass. There were also discrepancies over fabric tearing. Brennan tried to argue that the smaller, lighter dummy wearing a smaller sweatshirt wasn't a reliable simulation of John O'Keefe's injuries. Wolf stood by his analysis, but admitted that this was his first time doing this type of clothing damage testing. At one point, Wolf told Brennan, quote, "You're getting confused," end quote. Not something you say lightly in open court to a prosecutor, but hey, Wolf held his ground. Now, not for nothing, but this is a case where witnesses talk back to the attorneys, both Commonwealth and defense witnesses, I might add. Then came Jackson on redirect. He went full math nerd and even pulled out the kinetic energy formula to show that even when adjusting for different arm weights and vehicle speeds, the forces weren't high enough to match the SUV damage or O'Keefe's injuries. Wolf calculated energy values, 3,415 joules versus 3,944 joules, and told the jury that a 14% difference is not enough to flip the conclusion. Y'all, my eyes were crossing. And when I say that they, no kidding, whipped out old school math, they whipped out old school math, pen and paper included. Jackson even joked, quote, "If I mention joules again, my head is gonna explode," end quote. I feel this in my soul. All right, with that, Dr. Wolf was excused. Next, we heard from John Teddeman, a private investigator for the defense who visited 34 Fairview Road last week, the scene of the alleged crime from 2022. Mr. Teddeman described the different entrances to 34 Fairview from the front, which honestly, before this testimony, I don't think I realized that there were 3 distinct entrances, and actually 5 if you include the 2 garage car openings. Here is that explanation briefly of the openings of the front of 34 Fairview.
When you got to 34 Fairview Road in Canton on June 3rd, did you make note of the various entrances to the residence on the front, from the front of the house?
I did.
Could you describe those for the jury?
Yes, on the left side center of the building, there's what I would call the front door, up those 4 steps, I guess. Then if you were to look farther to the right, there at the end of the main building, there's another door, which I guess is the second front door or side door.
And with regard to that door, is it fair to say that faces outward, faces toward the road?
It does. It faces directly towards the road.
Okay, continue, please.
And then past that to the right, there are the windows, and then if you can see the little red line, that is a side door that goes into the garage. Yes, right there.
It's been highlighted there?
Yes.
Okay. And then there are obviously the 2 garage doors.
And the 2 garage car doors, yes.
4 cars to enter. Okay.
Yes.
We can take that down. Mr. Wilk, and put the lights on. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
But Teddeman was really testifying because he measured walking distances from the mailbox to various doors. Here they are. Mailbox to main door, 65 feet, 9 inches. To the breezeway, 70 feet, 1 inch. And to the garage, 78 feet and 3 inches. I'm sure that the defense will tie this all in during closing arguments. Next witness was Dr. Elizabeth Lappasato, former chief medical examiner for the state of Rhode Island. She's done well over 3,000 autopsies and supervised over 7,000 more. She's testified in courts hundreds of times, and actually she teaches pathology at Brown University. Dr. Lappasato spoke about the cause and manner of John O'Keefe's death, and she spoke about John's injuries and how they were inconsistent with what she typically sees in motor vehicle accidents. Dr. Lappasato described the injuries as blunt force trauma and explained the concept of coup contre coup, which is the brain hitting one side of the skull and then bouncing and hitting the opposite side. And you might recall that phrase from Dr. Wolf. Not Dr. Wolf, who just testified this morning, Dr. Wolf, who testified for the Commonwealth, the brain surgeon who had to go to Miami to do some more brain surgeries, if you recall. He testified for the Commonwealth, and he also discussed this very theory. Dr. Lappasato testified that John O'Keefe's injury was consistent with falling backward and hitting an object with a rigid surface, not necessarily a flat surface. However, this concept, John hitting a rigid surface, conflicts completely with the prosecution's own neuroscience or neurosurgeon, Dr. Wolf, who said that a flat surface could still do that coup contre coup. Dr. Lappasato also talked about the raccoon eyes, bruising around the eyes that come from a basal skull fracture. And Jackson tried to lead this witness into saying that the raccoon eyes could have been the result of being hit with a fist, but Brennan quickly objected, and that objection was sustained. Jackson rephrased, but it got blocked. And then there was another sidebar. And sidebar after sidebar is really the theme of day 29, and let's be real, it's also the theme of almost every other day during this trial. Late in the afternoon, we hit some strategic stalling. Jackson told the court that he needed time to decide which photos from Lappasato's report he plans to show to the jury. Ultimately, the judge sent the jury home 30 minutes early today and told them to come in 30 minutes later tomorrow. Day 29 was peak retrial chaos. We had a dramatic mistrial motion, testy expert battles, accusations of prosecutorial misconduct, and multiple legal boundaries pushed to the limit. We also got a clearer picture of where the defense is going. They seem to be hammering that the crash doesn't match the injuries. And if that's the case, it supports a possible theory that John O'Keefe was attacked elsewhere, maybe? But I'm sure there will be more to come on that. Tomorrow, on day 30, Dr. Lappasato will likely conclude her testimony, and we expect more drama as the defense is looking to wrap things up. Then it's on to rebuttal witnesses from the Commonwealth. You already know that we are here until the bitter end, and we hope that you will stick with us. Thank you so much, alternates. We have officially hit 100,000 downloads on the Alternate podcast, and that is really only possible because of your faithful daily listening. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, and I know Tabitha feels the same way, thank you so much for everything. Keep telling your friends about the show, rate and review where possible, and just remember, after we are done with Karen Reed, we are still working the Sean Combs federal trial, and who knows, maybe you'll hear a little bit more about Lori Vallow recaps. I don't know, maybe that's in the horizon. We shall see. Thank you so much. All right, alternates, until next time, think like a juror, decide like one too.